Is this the best 4x3 handheld out there? That's what we're going to find out. Anbernic's previous metal handheld, the RG405M, was one of my favorites, and I used it almost daily. But this one is a different beast altogether, thanks to the UNISOC T618 CPU, which now adds PS2, Gamecube, Wii, and 3DS emulation to the mix. But before we deep dive into it, WinX Video Converter is a free powerful tool that converts, compresses, and even edits 4K and HD videos on Windows PCs. It supports hundreds of formats such as MP4, H.264, HEVC, MKV, MOV, and so on. Reduce the file size of large 4K and HD videos by up to 90% without noticeable quality loss. Edit, cut, crop, merge videos, and even add subtitles. Take advantage of GPU acceleration to help videos encode quickly. Find out more with the link in the video description. Anbernic's RG405M brings in a whole bunch of changes over the 353M, starting with its size. As much as I love the 353M, I thought it was a little small overall, but the 405M is a perfect sized handheld. It's comfortable to use for long periods while still being portable. The build quality is really impressive with a fine aluminium alloy casing. It's smooth, has rounded edges, and just feels really nice and solid in the hands. At 260 grams, it's not light, but adds to that solid premium feel. Once you go metal, you can never go back. Anbernic's grips on the rear are also a signature addition to their handhelds that you don't find anywhere else. Apart from helping to stop slippage when playing, the grips also stop the chance of scratches forming on the back when placing it down on a table or desk. The RG405M is available in black and what they call grey, which is what I've got, but it's more of a greeny grey in my opinion. The IPS touchscreen is now 4 inches over 3.5, which makes a big difference, and for me is a perfect size, especially considering its humble 640 by 480 resolution. It takes a little time to get used to the lower dots per inch, as everything isn't as sharp, especially in Android. The bigger pixels are not what we're used to with smartphone displays having such high resolutions these days, but once you get used to it, it's a banger, and I think it's a good compromise to be able to emulate more systems. Normally with Anbernic handhelds, I'd say the screen's colors are vibrant and the display is bright. But that's only half true with the RG405M. While the IPS display has nice color reproduction and wide viewing angles, the difference is in the brightness. Where I was gaming at 30% brightness on the RG353M, here I'm using 75%. The 405M is less visible in sunlight, as the 100% is not as bright, so there's that problem. However, the colors at 100% start to take a hit and look washed out, and overall too bright for me. One benefit of a dimmer screen is battery life, which we'll talk about later. Underneath are the speakers, headphone jack, and only one SD card slot. Unfortunately, there's no dual boot with Linux, but Black Seraph is working on dual booting Garlic OS from the SD card, which is of huge importance to me, as I'm not a fan of using Android for retro gaming whatsoever. On top, you've got the inline L and R buttons, which aren't as nice as triggers found on other handhelds, but not bad at all, and the same as on the RG353M. But I did find myself wanting the R2 and L2 buttons to be wider, especially for my larger hands. And well, it definitely wouldn't have hurt to make them bigger. There's one USB-C port for charging and connecting devices, volume, and power. Sadly, HDMI output is missing on this device, which was available on the 353M. The face buttons feel good. The Hall sticks are excellent for their size, but I do have a couple of gripes. The home, start, and select buttons are very stiff and not very nice to press. Also, I mainly play games from the late 80s to the mid 90s, so for me, the D-pad is the most important for movement, but Anbernic has decided to put the analog stick at the top, which favors the newer stuff. When I first saw it, I thought this would be a deal breaker, but actually the larger size of the handheld makes the D-pad on this much more comfortable than I expected. But it still isn't as comfortable as on the RG353M. If fighting or old school games are your jam, I'd probably recommend looking at that handheld. Anbernic includes really nice D-pads. almost on the level of a NES or Sega Master System controller from back in the day. Using the stick or D-pad for retro titles isn't a bad option, but again, it's not as good as on the 353M because of the positioning. For games that make use of the analog stick though, PlayStation, Nintendo 64, Dreamcast, Gamecube and Wii, it's great. The Anbernic RG405M is available with or without an SD card. The bundled SD card adds a whole bunch of game titles to the bundle, so you can just play straight away. Apart from that, you get a couple of screen wipes, a screen protector, and a USB-C charging cord in the box. This Android 12 handheld comes with 4GB of memory and 128GB of eMMC internal storage. The Google Play Store is also included, so you won't need to sideload apps. As I mentioned before, retro gaming on Android can be frustrating with all the setting up and the mix of touchscreen use. Nothing beats a Linux front end like Emulation Station, where it's just straightforward selection of your games and off you go. So to fix this problem, Anbernic has created their own front end in Android, which you can toggle from the top menu as game mode. This allows you to just go straight into playing the games without tinkering around. And if you bought the bundle, you can just add games to the SD card by putting them in the right folder and then hitting settings and searching for your games to add those in. Ideally, I just want to turn on the device and start playing and already have it set up with hotkeys for saving and loading state and fast forwarding. Unfortunately, it's not that streamlined and you'll still need to do some of that yourself. Anbernic's front-end solution is good, but definitely not perfect and no replacement for Emulation Station. But for me, it was enough to not make the RG405M a deal breaker by being forced to mess around with Android. Once Garlic OS is released, I'll be just sticking to that. But for those that like Android, you'll have the best of both worlds with the dual boot. Being a 4:3 aspect ratio handheld makes this perfect for many systems. PlayStation games play beautifully, and the ones that use analog sticks for movement are now especially nice to play. All Nintendo 64 games are on full speed, as you'd expect. Same with Dreamcast. Unfortunately, Sega Saturn still isn't full speed for many games. I thought the UNISOC T618 would power through everything. My hopes for full speed across the Sega Saturn library will have to continue on to the next CPU generation. Sony's PlayStation Portable, on the other hand, plays really well. It should handle pretty much every game you throw at it. And I didn't mind the black borders this time, as the 4-inch screen is big enough to make the experience acceptable. PSP is just too small on the 3.5-inch screen of the 353M. Nintendo 3DS is a mixed bag. Some games run slow, while others are full speed like Zelda, but it has graphical glitches. PlayStation 2 is an interesting one. I thought Tekken Tag Tournament and Ridge Racer 5 would be fine, since they were launch titles, but they ran really slow. However, Kingdom Hearts ran really well. Go figure. Neo Contra is also a game that works beautifully. You'll be able to play maybe half the PS2 library pretty well, especially if you use PAL games, as they ran at 50 Hz. Also, if you don't mind tinkering with the settings, you can squeeze out more frames. But overall, it's not a slam dunk here for PS2. With Gamecube, there's something wrong with Mario Kart Double Dash. Otherwise, it seems to run pretty well. Wind Waker ran full speed. Nintendo Wii requires a bit more power than Gamecube. Mario Kart Wii was close to full speed, and again, Zelda runs fine. It looks like you'll be able to play more Gamecube and Wii games than PS2, but it's still far from perfect. Of course, there's also a whole library of arcade games you can play, and the older retro systems. Android games will again be a mixed bag because of the 4:3 aspect ratio. I'd recommend a 16:9 widescreen handheld if you're big on Android titles. Same if you're wanting to stream modern games with Moonlight. Otherwise, you'll have problems getting some games to work in a 4:3 aspect ratio. The included stereo speakers are okay. There's no bass definition at all, but they're not bad if you don't have some headphones lying around. Battery life was really good. I got over 7 hours playing various systems. With a lower brightness and more game time on lower end systems, you'll definitely meet Anbernic's 8-hour runtime. Impressive. Okay, so let's take a look at the pros and cons of the Anbernic RG405M. It's the only 4x3 handheld at the moment with a powerful budget UNISOC CPU, and the screen is nice and big at 4 inches. Battery life is great. The build quality is premium thanks to the metal case. I love it. Those wanting to play games with the stick over the D-pad will be very happy chappies. But playing games with the D-pad is not as comfortable, which makes fighting games especially more of an issue. There's no dual boot into Linux for retro gaming, but it should hopefully come soon thanks to Black Seraph's Garlic OS. Anbernic's front end makes Android more tolerable, but it still requires use of the touchscreen and controls, which is not ideal. Also, what happened to HDMI out? While it didn't bother me much, the screen isn't as bright as others I've used, but it will be a problem if you try and play outside with lots of sunlight. So the T618 CPU isn't powerful enough to get through all of the Sega Saturn, Gamecube, Wii, 3DS and PS2 library. You can play a lot of games, but many will not run full speed. I wouldn't get it just for those systems. But for consoles such as Dreamcast and lower, and for handhelds, PSP and lower, you'll be able to play pretty much everything at full speed. If you're a retro or fighting game fan and will use the D-pad most of the time, you might be better off looking at the RG353M, which is really good for that. Overall, I'm pretty happy with it. My biggest issue is the lack of dual boot, which will hopefully soon be fixed, as I won't be using Android once that's available. I also would have preferred the D-pad on top. It's okay as it is. The Anbernic RG405M is a very good handheld for the dollars, but whether it's right for you depends entirely how you're going to use it. That being said, it comes recommended. But before you go, make sure to check out my review of the RG353M, as it's a nice retro handheld too. Cheers!